Hello, everyone. My name is Natalie Fowler, and I'm really excited to be here with all of you today, talking a little bit about my favorite subject, which is ghosts, and some new things I've learned from the work that I've done with ghosts and spirits in my days as a paranormal investigator and a practicing psychic medium. However, first I want to start with just introducing myself and telling you all a little bit about me. And kind of how I end up doing this work, because this was so not what I was planning to do with my life. I actually used to be a lawyer. And so my logical, rational brain has served me very well in all of this. But I wanted to just give you a little bit of a background with how I got into this work. And really, it actually started when I was a little girl. I was fascinated with ghosts. I was the kid at the campfire who could never get enough about the ghost stories. And it wasn't that I was particularly brave or anything like that. I just was fascinated. And one of the things that struck me was that you always hear a ghost story, and it's always told from this perspective of how scary it is to have a ghost or to see a ghost. And I always thought it would be equally scary to be the ghost. So I always approached this work from that perspective. And again, my life took a really logical turn. I went on to law school, worked as a practicing attorney for a while. And in that time, I just thought it would be really interesting. I was more involved in creative fiction, and I just thought it would be really interesting to take a character who's trained to think logically and rationally, like a lawyer, and give her something completely irrational to deal with, like a ghost. So I started writing fictional stories about all of this in the name of sharing that ghost perspective and how to kind of look at things a little bit in a different way. And that work in my creative life led me to a group called Ghost Stories, Inc. I'm a member of that. I actually, they invited me to go along with them. It's a group that's dedicated to, it's a little bit different twist on a ghost investigation. It's a group that, instead of going and trying to go prove that there's something there, it's a group of creatives. And the whole point is to go out, and if you're going to be writing about something scary from a fictional perspective, go sit in a haunted space, go sit in a historic space, and it'll give you a deeper level of what that feels like, so that you can write about it or create about it in a different way. So this is this group invited me to go with one time on a ghost hunt, and here I'd been writing about ghosts for years. I didn't know if I really wanted to go shake one out of an attic. But I went along anyway, and it opened up a whole new world for me as I started going on different adventures with my Ghost Stories Inc. group. We were out in California to do an investigation. We from out in Manhattan to investigate the Morris Jamel mansion, just different places and spaces. I realized that I was actually picking up on a lot of the energy in those spaces, and realizing that I had some of my own gifts that were coming online, and I figured I'd better figure out what to do with these things. Little did I know that a lot of my fiction work back in those early days was actually me writing my own story, and they were actually very prophetic. My fictional characters I became my fictional character. In my fiction stories, I have a lawyer who's looking for who's helping ghost clients, and that actually ended up being what I started doing in my own work, and inspired my book, The Spirit's Way Home, which came out with Llewellyn a year or so ago. And yeah, so it tells the story of how this soccer mom lawyer started doing the work that I do in haunted spaces. I work with some of the most notoriously haunted properties in the United States. I do a lot of events and work at the Palmer House Hotel in Sauk Center, Minnesota. That's really been a lot of, it's an amazing place to learn about the paranormal. So a lot of the stories in the book are from there, and really talks about my evolution into this work. And now what I want to talk about is some of the things that I've discovered doing this work. As paranormal investigators, I'm really grateful actually that I was a paranormal investigator first before I knew I had these psychic gifts, because it helped me approach an investigation in a different way, using that more logical brain and wanting to make sure that not everything you hear is a bump or a thump that's coming from a ghost energy. So learning how to debunk some of those things. But what I found in my work in these spaces is that there's a couple different ways that a space can be haunted. So I'm going to talk about those first, and then I'm going to get in a little bit more into the difference between ghosts and spirits, because I've really started to realize that there is a difference, and I'll talk about that in a minute. So there's two different ways a property can be haunted. The first is residual. A space can be haunted with residual energy. And we've kind of learned that there are actually two different types of residual energy. There's emotional residual energy, which is emotions that kind of get dumped in a space and can get stuck there. It's the same feeling that you feel, for example, let's say you walk into a room after two people have argued. Sometimes we know that heaviness, we know what that feels like, even though we weren't there to experience the argument. We can feel the heavy energy hanging in the air and know that something happened. So that's one way a property can be haunted, is with residual emotional energy. Another type of residual energy is repetitive residual energy. And this is something that happens, for example, the Palmer House Hotel has been in existence as a hotel since the early 1900s, so over 100 years of hotel activity. And one of the things that's very common at the Palmer House is footsteps in the night, footsteps down the hallway, and different things, doors shutting, and so those footsteps, though, that you hear, if you think back to the history of the early days of this building in its existence, there were only 2 bathrooms, one on each floor. And so it makes sense that at night at 8 o'clock, everyone would get in line and walk down the hallway and go wait for the facilities. And so one of the most common things that people experience at the Palmer House Hotel is footsteps in the hallway when they know that there's no one out there. So that's an example of a repetitive residual energy that can get trapped in a space. We've also come to learn as paranormal investigators that there's an intelligent energy there. Sometimes a space can be haunted with intelligent energy. And this is energy that you can actually interact with if you've watched the ghost shows, you know, turning the flashlights on, hearing the EVPs. This is all an intelligent energy that we're interacting with. And now what I want to get into and talk about a little bit more is that difference. You know, one of the things that I'm realizing in my work as a practicing psychic medium is that, you know, the energies in this earth are shifting. And I'm sure if you've watched any of the other presentations this week, there's probably been some talk of us shifting into the age of Aquarius. And so I'm going to talk for just a minute about what that means and the way I see it as a psychic medium. Our earth is going through a lot of shifts and changes right now. And one of the things that's happening is that the veils are getting thinner than they ever have before. We're getting more sensitive. We've got a lot of people coming online with some of their own psychic gifts and abilities. And one of the reasons this is happening is because the energies are shifting so much that it's easier than ever to get messages from the other side and to the other side. So that's kind of part of my passion, is helping people understand that and helping people understand what's happening in their space. I think we can all relate to a couple of years ago when the world shut down. There were a lot of opportunities to sit in your own space and feel what that feels like. I actually got a lot of calls for remote work during that time because people were having to spend more time in their space and feeling that energy and getting a little more tuned into that. And that's one of the things that's happening with the age of Aquarius, is that we're becoming more sensitive to some of the energies that are out there. And as I've gone on more paranormal investigations, I've learned and now understand that sometimes that energy interaction that we're having isn't necessarily a bad thing. I've been on a number of investigations at the Palmer House or in other places where you're sitting there with a big group of people, and sometimes a grandparent or a loved one who's passed away will show up and give a message to someone sitting in the group. And that's a really, really beautiful moment when that can happen. And when that happens, like it's really taught me that there's different layers of energy. There's different types of energy that we're interacting with. So, and I don't even know if there's human words to describe this. For simplicity's sake, I consider them a ghost and a spirit, with the idea that a spirit is a loved one who's passed and gone to where they're supposed to go. And I'll get into more of that in a minute. But, you know, my father passed away a few years ago, 2 years ago now in August, and I came from a Catholic background, a Catholic upbringing, and he is was a very faith-filled man. And we had, he went in through a hospice situation, and we were doing hospice at home. And one of the things that I realized in a lot of those conversations that we had together, and this, of course, these conversations were happening right before my book came out, so he never actually got to see my book. I think he passed away in August, and my book came out in September. And one of the things that I realized in some of those conversations that we had together is that we don't always do very well explaining death and explaining what happens when our soul leaves our body. So, and as someone who was raised in religion with this concept of heaven, hell, and purgatory, that can, when we're going into that dying process, that can kind of mess with us a little bit. And that was one of the conversations that we had. Actually, I mentioned to him that there was one day where I felt grandma, his mother, come and sit down next to me on the swing, and he got really confused by that. And he asked me, does that mean that grandma was in purgatory? And I said, no, Dad, it means that your heaven gets to be wherever you want it to be. If your idea of heaven is sitting on the dock fishing with your grandkids, then you get to do that. And so that's one of the beautiful parts of my job, is that getting to help people kind of just have a different understanding of death, and realizing that it's not so permanent as maybe that as we're taught. Our loved ones can actually be around us all the time. That doesn't necessarily mean that they're a ghost. So I'm going to talk a little bit now about what I've come to understand. I believe that we're going to see science catching up with this a little bit in the next couple of years. There's a lot more focus on consciousness now and what that is. And, one of the reasons we're so fascinated by paranormal energy is that it's something that we haven't quite fully understood yet. And it's human nature to be curious. So it explains why there's so many people out there trying to prove that there's something there. And I think with some of our technology that we've developed over the last couple of years, we're going to start to see things catch up a little bit with that. But one of the ways that I explain it, or one of the energetic ways, explanations of all of this, is, when you look into what a ghost is, my definition of that is a ghost is a sliver of consciousness that kind of gets stuck in the earth realm. It's energy that's functioning at a lower vibration, and it often, when you experience a ghost energy, it feels confused, angry, or frustrated, some of those lower vibrational emotions. And for me, I've come to understand that a spirit is actually a soul that is transcended into the next plane of existence. And it's energy that can come back and forth and visit and be with us in this realm or the next. It's energy that's functioning at a high vibration, and often this energy feels joyful and overwhelming. It's almost like when you feel the presence of a spirit, an energy that's at that high vibration, it's almost like our physical bodies can't even process that amount of love. And it's like we just have to squeeze it out with our tears. It's why people just suddenly start crying when they feel that energy come in. It's because our physical bodies can't even process the amount of unconditional love from the other side with that. Some recommended reading here. Another Llewellyn author is that I saw on the list, and I'm really excited for his presentation, is Christopher Penczak. And he has a book that came out several years ago called Ascension Magic. And for me, my lawyer brain needed to know where these different vibrations were and how these were all interacting. And his book puts things in order, and I really appreciated that. I liked knowing, if I'm sitting here in this human body, here's where I'm sitting in the plane of existence. If I'm connecting with a spirit, a loved one who's gone to the other side, that's sitting in a different plane of existence. And then I see it as the ghost energy itself is kind of trapped in an in-between. It's in the human realm, but it doesn't have a body to function in anymore. And it's actually just a little bit of a sliver of energy that gets left behind. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that right now. What I've come to understand in my work is that, we have these energetic etheric bodies that, we learn about our human bodies in science and health class, but nobody ever really teaches us a whole lot about our etheric energetic body. And so one of the things that happens, that energetic body develops in utero, just the way our physical bodies do. And if you're looking for a good explanation of this, another Llewellyn author is Kayla Ambrose, and I recommend her books all the time. She's got a book called The Awakened Psychic and The Awakened Aura, and I highly recommend her classes if you're interested in this at all. But she really does a good job of explaining this energetic body as it develops in utero. And one of the things that happens is our crown chakra is the first to develop. If you've ever seen an ultrasound picture of a baby, it's a giant head. And that's the crown chakra developing on down to our root chakra. And those energy centers kind of lock in place. And we all probably know those little kids too that have their head in the clouds and are running around in another world. And part of that is because their root chakra isn't totally attached to the earth energy yet. And those lower level chakras are where we carry our belief systems. So our beliefs and programming about religion, our fears, our worries, different things, all kind of sit in our lower level chakras. When we die, they disconnect in reverse order. So if you've ever watched anyone going through hospice or dealing with a transition like that, those energy centers are slowly disconnecting. Often those people are talking about loved ones that they're seeing from the other side, or they're in between worlds, and that's because they've already started disconnecting their chakra system so that they can then go on to the other side. And this is where things can kind of get stuck. If you're functioning under a belief system that talks about heaven and hell, and you were a person who committed a crime or committed one of those acts that would have destined you to hell, that can cause a little kink in the disconnect process when you're working on disconnecting those energy centers. And that can be enough of a reason to allow a sliver of energy to kind of get left behind. Another common thing that I see in my practice is, if your loved one is really worried about the people that they're leaving behind, that can be enough. And if they're carrying enough fear around that, that can be enough to cause that little energy center to not shut down properly. And that little sliver of energy is actually what we're interacting with as a ghost energy. So again, one of the ways that I understand and can feel the difference in a space is the emotion that comes in with that clairsentient gift that gives you the emotion that's coming in with those energies. The ghost energies tend to be a much lower vibration, and those are going to come with angry, frustrated, or confusing energy. Whereas if you're interacting with a spirit, a soul who has gone on and transitioned properly and coming back to interact with us. So our loved ones that have gone before, the pennies from heaven, or the different signs that we're getting from our loved ones, that usually comes in with a lot lighter vibration, a higher vibration, and much more comfortable emotions, happiness, love, and all of that. So as we move more into the age of Aquarius, I would encourage you to think about some of the differences, different energies that you're feeling. And remember that if you are interacting with that ghost energy, it really is just a sliver of energy left. And we with our human bodies, our energy fields are infinitely stronger than anything else that's out there. So your energy field is going to infinitely be more powerful than that sliver of a soul that just got stuck and left behind. And a lot of times that energy, it just needs a little encouragement to go. So if you're feeling that feeling, it can be, helping that soul can be as simple as saying, follow the light, or, and offering some words of encouragement. That certainly has happened on our paranormal investigations. There was a time where we accidentally crossed one over, and the place we were investigating now has one less than they thought they did. So anyway, I am going to stop talking for a minute. I really want to be able to have some time to answer your questions. So I would love to see what you want to talk about. And so feel free to ask any questions now in the chat, and I'm happy to take questions. So let's see. I just noticed Tara mentions having several dreams of her grandmother since her grandmother passed. And that actually is one way some of us are wired. I work with an astrologer a couple days a week. And one of the things that I can see that we can actually see in the birth chart is that some of our gifts are wired a little bit differently. And some people are more tuned into the other side during their dream state in non-physical reality. So yes, you can definitely have dreams of our loved ones, and that very much counts as a spirit visit. And now I'm going to answer the question. I noticed there's a question about animals, and I believe that our animals cross over just as we do. They don't have egos, so there's not as much for them to get stuck with behind. I actually had a really fun story. So my family, we lived overseas in Belgium for several years, and we moved over there with a dog. And the dog, in her old age, we had later found out that my son was allergic to dogs. So we had to rehome our dog before we moved back, and she went to a really good friend of mine. And when we moved back, my son started allergy shots, all the things, so that we could get back to having a dog again. And this time we decided a 10-pound terrier mutt was much better than the 100-pound lab that we used to have. And there was one night in the middle of the night where my new dog, our new terrier, started barking like crazy. It's a bark and a cry that I've never heard her make. I had never heard her make before or since. And she was still really new with us. So she was sleeping in a crate. And at about 3 a.m, I hear her go crazy, can't settle her down. We ended up having to move her crate into our room with us. And later the next morning, I got a text message from my dear friend in Belgium who had taken our dog, and she had told me that they had to put her down. And when I looked at the timing of all of it, the timing of her message was right after my dog had started barking, if you count in the time change in Belgium. And so it just made me laugh. I could literally see my dog, my old dog, coming in. And when I closed my eyes in my mind's eye, I could see my dog coming in, looking at my new dog in the crate. And I think she probably said something like, "Sucker." They never made me sleep in a crate when I lived here. And I felt her around a lot after that. So I think our animals are very much can be in our soul groups and can absolutely come back and check on us. In fact, I even think that my dog that I have now used to be my cat. Our animals can make sure that they're coming back to us every chance they get. So if you have a dog that reminds you a lot of your cat, for me, I know that my dog actually has the same markings that my cat used to have, and she sleeps in the very same spot on the bed that my cat used to have. So, yeah. So any other questions that I can answer? I'm just going to scroll back up. Yes, I'm just loving, I'm loving all the stories about our loved ones visiting. It really does validate that you can have these different energy interactions, and it doesn't all have to be bad or negative. A lot of times it's our loved ones just coming back to check on us. And right now, with the veils so thin, you don't need signy or signs. Our loved ones are leaving us messages, animal spirit visits, animal visits, anything like the pennies that you find and you think of, your loved ones. There's a lot of messages getting through. We just have to be paying attention to them. So. Yes, and I'm looking here at a comment from a hypnotherapist and mentioning how interesting it is to have so many spirits coming through and in her sessions. And I think it's because you get to this plane of you kind of tap into that plane of existence where your ego is suspended. Okay, there's a question here that I want to make sure I get to. How do you deal with an energy that frightens you? And with that, I think, one of the first things I would is to remember that you're the one with the human body, and your energy field is infinitely stronger than anything else that's out there. I think a lot of times in our pop culture, we're taught to be afraid of this. And what I've come to understand, and there's a few stories about this in my book, is that sometimes that, this is a sliver of energy, and energy needs a boost in order to keep going. And I've actually seen some of those lower vibrational energies, the ghost energies, actually kind of make a habit of jumping out and scaring us, because when they scare us, that allows us to emit an emotion and energy that they can actually use to get stronger. So my advice is to keep just set your intention. Only light and love is allowed in my space. I have a lot of I talk a lot about psychic protection. I've got actually a blog post on that if you want to go check out my blog post. It's my website is nataliefowler.com. And yeah, I have a whole blog post on psychic protection. There's a lot that we can do in our own imaginations, actually, just to keep our energy fields protected. And when you feel safe and secure in your own energy field, that's going to keep any other energy out there away from your space. I actually was on a paranormal investigation one time where we were using an SLS camera, so the Kinect's imaging that you've often seen on, and the whole point is that it maps in a stick figure. And we were in this space, and there was an energy coming down, and it was kind of doing some really naughty things on my head. And I kept my voice light. I didn't want to startle anyone in the group. And so I just said, you need to treat me like a lady if you're allowed to be in my space. And this energy was still coming down and doing some naughty things on my head. And so I just visualized, I closed my eyes for a minute. I visualized pushing my own bubble of protection out a little bit further. And on the camera, the whole image went poof and disappeared. So know and trust that your energy field is infinitely stronger than any other little sliver of energy that's out there. So by your intention, you can keep your own field safe and secure. So, all right. I just want to take a minute. Let's see. Is there any other questions here? Yes, I'm going to just end with this. And there's a commenter who talked about asking for a sign from our loved ones and then getting the validation of that sign not long after. So we absolutely can do that. Like I said earlier, the veil is thinner than it ever has been before. So they're getting information from us, and we get information from them better than ever and more easily than ever before. So if you've got a loved one and you want to have a sign from them, set an intention before you go to sleep and ask to have a dream about that person and see if they show up. Be intentional with your thoughts and ask for a sign, and don't be surprised when you get it. But we all have to be paying attention in order to get those signs. So, all right. I just want to take a minute and thank everyone for coming today. It was really a pleasure to be able to talk to you about something that I'm very passionate about. So have a wonderful rest of your day and enjoy all of the other LlewellynCon authors.